A female defense CEO pretended to be homeless for one night, but she never expected a broke combat medic to give her the meal meant for his sick daughter. Outside Black Ridge Veterans Medical Center, freezing rain hammered the glass while ambulances screamed through the dark. Inside, a woman in a soaked army green coat sat beside an empty cup ignored by nurses, watched by security, and ordered back into the storm. Then Daniel Reed walked in with $7 a pharmacy bag and one promise left to keep. His daughter was waiting at home. The food in his hands was all they had until payday. What happened next would expose missing medical supplies, falsified records, and a system built to silence the one man who refused to look away. Stay until the end. This story is not only about kindness. It is about what courage costs when no one powerful is watching, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Daniel Reed had walked into Black Ridge Veterans Medical Center carrying $7 a pharmacy bag and one promise left to keep. But the story of that night had begun hours earlier, 40 miles north, inside a glass tower where hunger existed only as a number on a quarterly report. At 8:15 that morning, Dr. Amelia Cross sat at the head of a polished conference table on the 36th floor of North Star Defense Medical Headquarters in Denver. Beyond the windows, the Rocky Mountains rose through a veil of winter clouds. Snow gathered along the rooftops below, softening the city into something distant and clean. Inside the room, everything shone. The table reflected the ceiling lights. Silver water pitchers stood beside untouched glasses. Each leather chair faced a wall-sized screen displaying photographs of smiling veterans, military families, and medics unloading relief supplies beneath the North Star emblem. Victor Shaw stood beside the screen in a charcoal suit, one hand resting lightly on a remote. He looked completely at ease. Regional performance exceeded projections for the third consecutive quarter, he said. Emergency inventory losses are down, labor costs are down, disposal expenses are down. Patient satisfaction has improved across every major facility. The screen changed. A combat veteran smiled as a nurse handed him a meal tray. The words beneath the photograph read, "Community First." Amelia studied the image. She had seen it before. The photograph was 6 years old. It had been taken during a wildfire response operation outside Pueblo when her father was still alive, and North Star was still small enough for senior executives to know the names of warehouse drivers. Victor continued speaking. Black Ridge has become our strongest regional model. Lean operations, disciplined access control, reduced waste, and improved public trust. Amelia looked down at the printed report in front of her. The numbers were almost perfect. Too perfect. She turned one page, then another. What happened to open ration? Victor paused for less than a second. Consolidated. Amelia raised her eyes. That was not my question. 2 board members stopped writing. Victor gave a calm smile. The program was underused and difficult to control. It created unnecessary exposure. Staff could not consistently verify eligibility, and some locations reported repeated abuse. Abuse by whom? Non-patients. People without veteran status. Individuals using the facilities for warmth, food, or shelter. Amelia leaned back. Open ration had been created by her father after a disabled veteran froze to death behind one of North Star's early clinics. The man had been found 30 feet from a heated waiting room. He had not gone inside because he believed he needed insurance. Her father had written the first policy himself. Anyone in immediate need could receive a simple meal, water, and temporary shelter inside a North Star facility. No proof of military service, no payment, no explanation. It had cost the company less than a national advertising campaign. Now it was gone. Who authorized the consolidation? Amelia asked. Victor shifted the remote into his other hand. Regional discretion was included in the efficiency directive approved last spring. Amelia remembered the directive. 40 pages of staffing models, supply controls, transportation costs, and compliance targets. Open ration had not appeared in the executive summary. You removed it under an efficiency directive. We corrected an uncontrolled program. Amelia looked toward the photograph on the screen. Community First. Change the slide. Victor clicked the remote. A graph replaced the smiling veteran. Emergency medical disposal had fallen by 41% across Victor's region. Damaged inventory reports were lower. Expired product write-offs had nearly disappeared. Amelia traced one line with her finger. What explains this reduction? Better forecasting. Across every category, our managers have become more disciplined. Rachel Boone sat near the end of the table, silent behind a tablet. She had worked military intelligence before joining North Star as Amelia's chief of staff. She had a habit of watching people instead of presentations. Her eyes remained on Victor. Amelia noticed. "Respiratory kits," Amelia asked. Victor clicked to another page. Also improved. Pediatric inhalers, minimal loss. Trauma dressings below projection. Amelia closed the report. 41% in 1 quarter. Victor nodded. Strong leadership creates measurable results. No one spoke. Through the windows, snow drifted between the buildings. Far below, traffic moved through the city in thin red lines. Amelia's father used to say that numbers were useful because they could reveal suffering without forcing people to witness it. He also warned that numbers could hide suffering just as easily. Victor placed the remote on the table. "We should be proud of this quarter." Amelia looked around the room. Several directors nodded. One executive had already opened the next agenda item. Another was checking messages beneath the table. The meeting continued. New contracts, expansion proposals, a mobile surgical unit for wildfire response, a partnership with a pharmaceutical distributor, a discussion about employee retention that never mentioned wages. Amelia listened, asked questions, and signed 2 routine approvals. But her attention stayed with the missing program and the impossible numbers. At 10:43, the meeting ended. Chairs moved back, tablets closed. Victor gathered his files. "Excellent work," one board member told him. Victor accepted the praise with a modest smile. As he passed Amelia, he stopped. "I hope my response regarding open ration was sufficient." It was clear. He studied her face. "That program belonged to another period in the company's development. My father created it." "I know." Victor lowered his voice. "He also ran 6 facilities. You run 84. Amelia held his gaze. "Scale does not make people less hungry. No, it makes uncontrolled compassion more expensive." The words were quiet enough that no one else reacted. Victor buttoned his jacket. "North Star cannot become a shelter system. It operates hospitals. It operates contracts." Amelia said nothing. Victor smiled again and left the room. Rachel waited until the door closed. "He was prepared for that question," she said. Amelia watched Victor disappear beyond the glass wall. "He is prepared for every question. That is not always a sign of competence." Amelia looked at the disposal graph still frozen on the screen. Pulled the original facility reports. Rachel did not ask why. All regions start with Colorado. The first envelope arrived 20 minutes later. It had no return address and no postage stamp. A security officer carried it into Amelia's private office inside a clear evidence sleeve. "It was left at the East reception desk," he said. "The cameras show a courier jacket baseball cap face covered by a scarf. No readable plate." "Was it screened?" "Yes, ma'am." Amelia signed for it. After the officer left, Rachel locked the office door. The envelope was made of brown paper, thick and worn at the corners. Amelia opened it with a letter knife. 4 photographs slid onto her desk. The first showed a medical waste container behind a North Star warehouse. Inside were unopened pediatric inhalers, each still sealed in plastic. The second showed boxes of trauma dressings stacked beside black disposal bags. The third showed emergency nutrition trays scattered across wet pavement behind Black Ridge Veterans Medical Center. The fourth showed a white cargo van parked beside a loading dock after midnight. Its rear doors were open. North Star medical crates were visible inside. Rachel picked up the first photograph. "These inhalers have lot numbers." Amelia turned the image toward the window. The expiration dates were visible. 9 months remained. A folded sheet of paper lay beneath the photographs. Amelia opened it. The message had been written in block letters. "They are changing the records after the trucks leave. Ask what happened to the respiratory kits. Ask why Reed was silenced. Start at Black Ridge." Rachel read it twice. "Reed could be an employee, or someone Victor wants us to believe is an employee. You think the package may be staged. I think anonymous evidence is evidence of fear. It is not evidence of truth." Rachel placed the photographs in a straight line. "The numbers match the categories you asked about." Amelia looked again at the cargo van. "Does Victor know this arrived?" "Not unless you tell him." Amelia removed the diamond watch from her wrist and set it on the desk. "Then he does not know." Rachel frowned. "What are you thinking?" Amelia stood and walked toward the private washroom connected to her office. I want to see Blackridge. I can arrange an inspection. No inspection. Then what? Amelia stopped at the doorway. Every facility looks different when it knows the chief executive is coming. Rachel understood before Amelia finished speaking. You are not going alone. I am. That is not a reasonable security decision. It is the only way to know what happens when my title is not in the room. Rachel rose. You are a former trauma surgeon, not an intelligence officer. I remember. You have public photographs everywhere. Most people do not look directly at someone they have already decided not to see. Rachel's expression tightened. That sentence does not make this safer. No. Amelia entered the washroom. It makes it necessary. At noon, she left North Star headquarters through a delivery entrance wearing plain black pants, old boots, and a faded sweater borrowed from a maintenance locker. Her hair was pulled beneath a knitted cap. She carried no company phone, no identification bearing the cross name, and no corporate security device. 3 blocks away, she entered a thrift store on Colfax Avenue. The store smelled of dust detergent and old fabric. A clerk watched from behind the counter as Amelia moved through racks of winter clothing. She selected an army green coat with a torn lining and water stains along the cuffs. At the register, she paid cash. The clerk placed the coat in a plastic bag. You want the receipt now outside? Amelia removed her clean wool coat, folded it into the bag, and put on the used one. The shoulders were too wide. One sleeve hung lower than the other. She looked at herself in the dark reflection of a closed storefront. Dr. Amelia Cross disappeared slowly. The posture remained too straight. She lowered her shoulders. The eyes remained too direct. She looked toward the pavement. The face remained familiar. She pulled the knitted cap lower. Inside her pocket were 83 cents, an expired transit card, and a folded list of shelters Rachel had printed before Amelia left. For the rest of the day, her name was Mara Cole. Her first stop was a North Star urgent care clinic near Capitol Hill. The waiting room held 6 people. A child coughed into his mother's coat. A construction worker pressed a towel against his hand. An elderly man slept beneath a television playing a daytime court show. Amelia entered quietly and sat near the wall. The heat touched her face. For 10 minutes, no one spoke to her. Then a receptionist called from behind the desk. Ma'am, are you checking in? Amelia shook her head. I am waiting for the bus. This area is for registered patients. It is cold outside. I understand, but we need the seats. 3 chairs beside Amelia were empty. She looked toward them. The receptionist followed her gaze. It is policy. A young nurse emerged from the hallway carrying a paper cup of water. She looked at Amelia, then at the receptionist. She can stay until the bus comes. The receptionist lowered her voice. Administration sent another reminder this morning. The nurse hesitated. Amelia watched the decision pass across the woman's face. Compassion first, fear second. The nurse turned away with the cup still in her hand. Amelia stood and walked back into the cold. At a North Star contracted pharmacy, a security guard followed her from the entrance to the respiratory aisle. She stopped in front of a locked cabinet containing inhalers. The guard stopped too. Can I help you? I am looking. Those require assistance. I know. Do you have a prescription? No. Then there is nothing for you in that case. Amelia looked through the glass at the inhalers. Her own company had destroyed sealed units while children waited for prescriptions to be filled. The thought was not yet proof. It was only a photograph and a locked cabinet. She left. By late afternoon, snow had turned to freezing rain. At a mobile veteran support station outside Aurora, Amelia asked whether she could sit beneath the awning. A young medic brought her water. Before Amelia could drink, his supervisor appeared. She registered, "No, sir. Veteran identification." She did not say. The supervisor took the cup from Amelia's hands. "This unit is funded for eligible participants." The medic looked embarrassed. "It is water. It is inventory." The supervisor poured it into a drain. Amelia watched the water disappear through the metal grate. She had approved the funding for that unit 4 months earlier. The budget included thousands of dollars for community outreach. Not one line had warned that a cup of water might require proof of eligibility. By 6:30, the rain had soaked through her boots. Her hands were numb. Hunger had settled beneath her ribs, not yet painful but constant. She had eaten breakfast in her apartment that morning. She had money in an account. A driver waited 1 phone call away. A private office stood warm and empty in Denver. She knew all of this. Her body did not care. Cold reduced the world. Warmth became a doorway. Food became a smell. A chair became mercy. She boarded a city bus using the expired card and 83 cents. The driver glanced at the date, then at her wet coat. For a moment, Amelia expected to be removed again. Instead, he pressed a button beside the fare box. Sit down. It was the first kindness she had received all day. She found a seat near the back. The windows fogged as the bus moved south through the storm. Across the aisle, a mother divided crackers between two children. An older veteran slept with both hands around a canvas bag. A hospital cleaner rubbed her swollen feet through thin shoes. No one knew that the woman in the torn coat controlled thousands of salaries and hundreds of millions of dollars in medical contracts. Amelia stared at her reflection in the dark glass. She had spent years believing she understood service because she had once worked inside a trauma bay. She remembered blood on her gloves in Afghanistan, helicopter rotors shaking dust from the ceiling, young soldiers asking whether they would walk again, medics doing impossible work with limited supplies and no time to grieve. She had understood need then because need had stood in front of her. Now need arrived as reports. Efficiency replaced faces. Distance had entered quietly. By the time the bus reached Colorado Springs, night had fallen. The storm had worsened. Highway lights blurred through the rain. Amelia stepped onto the pavement near Black Ridge Veterans Medical Center and pulled the coat closed across her chest. The building rose ahead of her, broad and white, its emergency entrance glowing beneath a covered drive. Ambulances came and went. North Star's emblem shone above the doors, a silver star wrapped around a medical cross. Underneath were the words, "Service without delay." Amelia entered through the main lobby. Warm air struck her face. A security officer looked up immediately. "Can I help you?" "I am waiting for the last bus. This is a medical facility." "I know. Are you here with a patient?" "No." "Do you need treatment?" "No." "Then you cannot remain in the lobby." Amelia looked toward rows of nearly empty chairs. "Is the cafeteria open until 10? She thanked him and walked down the corridor. The smell of coffee and hot food reached her before she saw the entrance. At that same hour, 12 miles away, Daniel Reed stood beneath the fluorescent lights of North Star Distribution Center No. 7, watching a forklift carry sealed medical crates toward a restricted loading bay. He had been awake since 4:30 that morning. His back ached from lifting trauma packs. A cut across his left knuckle had reopened beneath his glove. His phone held 3 missed calls from an unknown number and 1 message from Lucy's school nurse. Lucy used her inhaler after recess. "Please confirm refill." Dan read the message twice. The prescription waited at the Black Ridge pharmacy counter. His insurance covered most of the cost. Most was not all. He had $7.14 after setting aside rent electricity and the amount needed for the inhaler. Payday was 2 days away. Marcus Bell approached carrying a clipboard. "You still here finishing Bay 4? Bay 4 was cleared an hour ago." Dan looked toward the restricted loading dock. A white cargo van waited beyond the doors. No company markings, no approved contractor plate. 3 respiratory kit crates sat on a pallet beside it. Dan knew the inventory numbers. He had photographed the same product 6 weeks earlier after finding identical crates inside a medical waste container. "Where's that shipment going?" he asked. Marcus followed his gaze. "Not our lane. It is not on tonight's board." "Then somebody above us approved it." "Who?" Marcus lowered the clipboard. "Dan." The way he said the name was a warning. Dan removed one glove. "These are emergency respiratory kits. I can read. They were marked for disposal last month." Marcus glanced toward the security camera in the corner. "Keep your voice down. They were never contaminated. You filed the report, and Victor closed it. Then you did what you were supposed to do." Dan looked at the van again. 2 men in plain jackets began loading the crates. Neither wore a North Star badge. In the Army, if morphine disappeared from a field station, we did not call the report complete because an officer closed a file. This is not the Army. No. Dan watched another crate enter the van. "That is becoming clear." Marcus stepped closer. "You have a daughter. You have a review with family services. You need this job." Dan's jaw tightened. Marcus knew because Dan had submitted an emergency schedule request to attend Lucy's medical appointments. Victor had denied it. Low operational priority. I also need to sleep at night, Dan said. Marcus sighed. Then go home and sleep. Dan pulled his phone from his pocket. The loading bay doors began to close. He managed one photograph before the van disappeared. The image was blurred by distance, but the rear license plate was visible. Marcus stared at him. You need to delete that. I need to know where those kits are going. You need to think about Lucy. I am. Dan placed the phone back in his pocket. His shift ended at 8:50. He changed out of his work gloves, signed the equipment log, and collected the pharmacy bag from the employee refrigerator where he had stored Lucy's medication after picking it up during his break. The bag felt too light. 1 inhaler, 1 month of breathing. Outside, freezing rain struck the warehouse roof. Dan walked to his truck and turned the key. The engine clicked. Nothing else. He tried again. The dashboard lights flickered and died. Dan rested his forehead against the steering wheel. For several seconds he remained still. Then he took the pharmacy bag, locked the truck, and started walking toward the bus line. At home, Lucy sat at the kitchen table beneath a weak yellow light. She was 9 years old with dark hair that never stayed tied and serious eyes that made adults careful with their words. A drawing lay in front of her. 3 figures stood beside a long table covered with bowls. One figure was taller than the others and wore a green jacket. Purple stars filled the sky above them. The apartment was quiet except for the rattle of the heater. Lucy opened the refrigerator. A bottle of mustard, half a carton of milk, 1 apple. She closed the door slowly. On the counter, 2 empty bowls waited beside 2 spoons. She placed a folded napkin next to one bowl. A purple star had been drawn in the corner. At 9:20, Dan called. Hey, Luce, you sound wet. It is raining. Did the truck break again? He smiled despite himself. You know too much. I am 9. That is what worries me. She looked at the bowls. Are you coming home? I am stopping for dinner. With the little noodles, Dan looked through the bus window as Blackridge Medical Center came into view. Something better? Bread, maybe. Lucy smiled. Dan could hear it in her voice. Do not forget the butter. I will not. And come home. He touched the folded napkin in his jacket pocket. The purple star pressed beneath his fingers. I always come home. The bus doors opened near Blackridge. Dan stepped into the freezing rain with the pharmacy bag under his arm and $7.14 in his pocket. Inside the medical center, Amelia Cross sat in the cafeteria beneath the name Mara Cole. Her empty cup had gone cold between her hands. Victor Shaw had just entered through the staff corridor, his polished shoes untouched by the storm. Dan pushed open the cafeteria doors as Victor looked toward the woman in the soaked green coat. The room quieted. Victor's voice carried beneath the white lights. Do not serve her. Victor Shaw said it without raising his voice. He did not need to. The authority in his tone moved through the Blackridge cafeteria faster than a shout. A spoon stopped against the rim of a coffee cup. A nurse paused with her hand inside a vending machine. Near the windows, a man wearing a private contractor badge lowered his phone just enough to see Victor clearly. The woman in the wet army green coat remained seated at the corner table. Her empty paper cup rested between both hands. Water gathered beneath her boots and spread across the tile in a dark crescent. The cafeteria worker looked from Victor to the stainless steel pot behind the counter. She only asked for soup. Victor removed one glove finger by finger. She is not a patient. The worker said nothing. She is not registered as a visitor. Victor continued. She has no veteran identification, no payment method, and no legitimate reason to remain inside the facility. The woman lifted her eyes. My bus does not come for another 40 minutes. Victor glanced toward the windows. Freezing rain struck the glass in sharp silver lines. Then you should have planned better. A security officer stood several feet away. He was young, broad-shouldered, and uncertain. His hand rested near the radio attached to his vest. Sir, he said, the storm is getting worse. Victor looked at him. The officer lowered his hand. Victor turned back toward the woman. This is a medical facility, not a shelter. She nodded once. Not because she agreed, because she understood that he wanted obedience, not conversation. Her name that night was Mara Cole. At least that was the name she had chosen before entering the building. No one in the room knew she had once performed emergency surgery under mortar fire. No one knew her signature controlled the company that operated the cafeteria, employed Victor, and supplied the trauma rooms beyond the wall. To them, she was only a wet coat, an empty cup, and a problem that had failed to produce identification. The cafeteria doors opened behind Victor. Daniel Reed stepped inside, carrying a pharmacy bag beneath one arm. Rain darkened the shoulders of his field jacket. His North Star warehouse badge hung from a frayed cord around his neck. His boots left wet marks across the tile as he walked toward the counter. He had heard Victor's final sentence. He had also heard the silence that followed. Dan looked at Mara. Then he looked at the security officer, then at Victor. Years earlier, in a field hospital outside Kandahar, Dan had learned to read a room before entering it. He could measure panic by the movement of hands, danger by the direction people looked, authority by the way others made themselves smaller. Nothing in the cafeteria was physically dangerous. Yet every person had already chosen a position. Victor stood near the center. The worker kept her eyes on the counter. The nurse had turned slightly away. The contractor held his phone at chest level. The security officer waited to be told what kind of man he was supposed to become. Dan stepped up to the register. What is still hot? The cafeteria worker cleared her throat. Beef stew, cornbread, coffee. How much for the stew and bread? $6.89. Dan reached into his pocket. 3 folded bills. 4 quarters. 2 nickels, 4 pennies. He counted them beneath the fluorescent lights. The contractor near the window watched with mild amusement. Dan placed the money on the counter. "Butter on the side," he said. The worker glanced at the pharmacy bag. "For you, my daughter likes to spread it herself." Something changed in the woman's face, only for a second. She placed a small packet of butter beside the roll. Dan collected the tray. The stew smelled of pepper beef stock and canned tomatoes. Steam rose from the bowl and touched his face. He imagined Lucy at the kitchen table with 2 empty bowls ready. He imagined her pretending not to notice how little food remained in the refrigerator. He imagined the inhaler inside the pharmacy bag and the numbers printed on the family services notice. Stable income, adequate housing, regular access to food. Words written by people who had never counted coins beneath hospital lights. Dan turned toward the seating area. Victor was speaking again. "I am asking you to leave voluntarily." Mara slowly released the paper cup. Her fingers had left faint marks in the damp cardboard. "I am not causing trouble. That is not the standard." "What is the standard?" Victor gave a patient smile. "Eligibility." Mara looked at the empty chairs around her. "For sitting down, for receiving services." "I have not received anything." "Exactly." The contractor laughed quietly. The sound was brief. Dan heard it. Mara heard it. Victor did not react because he considered the laugh an agreement. The security officer stepped forward. "Ma'am." Mara rose. Cold had stiffened her knees. The room tilted slightly as she stood, and she placed one hand against the table. Dan saw it. He saw the careful breath, the pale lips, the slight tremor in her wrist. Not acting, not theater. Whatever money she might possess in another life, whatever name she had hidden, the cold had reached her body honestly. Dan carried the tray across the cafeteria. Victor noticed him only when he stepped between Mara and the security officer. Dan placed the bowl of stew on her table. The sound of ceramic against laminate was small. It silenced the room. Mara stared at the tray. Dan set the cornbread beside the bowl. "Sit down," he said. She looked at him. "I cannot take this." "You can. It is yours." It was. Victor studied Dan's warehouse uniform. "This is not your concern." Dan pulled the chair out for Mara. "She is hungry. That does not make her your responsibility." Dan looked at Victor. "No, it makes her hungry." The nurse near the vending machine lowered her eyes. Mara remained standing. "Someone is waiting for you," she said. Dan picked up the cornbread and broke it in half. The roll separated unevenly. Steam escaped from the center. He wrapped one piece in the napkin Lucy had drawn on that morning. A purple star showed near the corner. He placed it inside his jacket pocket. "My daughter will understand." Mara's expression tightened. Children should not have to understand hunger. Dan placed the remaining bread beside the stew. "She understands sharing." Victor exhaled through his nose. "Mr. Reed." Dan looked up. Victor's face had changed. The polite irritation was gone. Recognition settled behind his eyes. "Daniel Reed," Victor said. The contractor raised his phone higher. Victor stepped closer and looked at the badge hanging from Dan's neck. Distribution Center 7. Dan did not answer. Night shift inventory. You know where I work. I know who files reports from my facilities. The cafeteria worker looked between them. Mara lowered herself into the chair, but she did not touch the food. Victor's attention remained on Dan. You photographed controlled medical property. I documented sealed supplies inside a disposal container. You entered a restricted area. The container was beside my loading bay. You had no authority to inspect it. Dan's voice remained even. I had enough authority to read an expiration date. The contractor shifted to capture both faces. Victor noticed the phone and adjusted his posture. His shoulders softened. His expression became professional. The performance was instinctive. Your complaint was reviewed. It was closed 17 minutes after I sent it, because it lacked evidence. I attached photographs without quality control context. Then show me the contamination report. Victor's smile disappeared. The rain intensified against the windows. In the corridor beyond the cafeteria, a stretcher rolled toward the emergency department. Its wheels rattled over the doorway seam. A medic called for someone to clear the hall. Inside, no one moved. Mara watched Victor closely. What supplies? She asked. Victor did not look at her. This does not involve you. Mara reached for the spoon. What supplies were thrown away? Dan looked down at her. He had spent years learning when frightened people needed information and when they needed silence. Mara did not look frightened now. She looked focused. Respiratory kits, he said. Pediatric inhalers, trauma dressings, emergency nutrition packs. The spoon stopped above the bowl. All expired. Number Victor stepped between them. Mr. Reed is a warehouse employee with no access to clinical testing contamination reports or contract requirements. Dan's eyes stayed on Mara. Some boxes had 9 months left before expiration, seals intact, no damage, no recall markings. Victor turned toward him. You do not know what happened before those items reached your bay. Neither do you. The words struck cleanly. Victor's jaw tightened. Dan continued. The files should show where they came from, who inspected them, and why they were destroyed. They do. Then open them. The contractor took a step closer. Victor noticed. His voice lowered. You are already under internal review. That is the first I have heard of it. Your supervisor has documented repeated insubordination. Dan looked toward the ceiling for half a second. Not surprise. Calculation. Marcus had warned him to stop asking questions, but Marcus had never called him insubordinate. Victor saw the doubt. He pressed harder. You have been photographing secure loading areas, questioning dispatch orders, interfering with approved disposal operations. I asked where the supplies were going. You were told the matter was outside your responsibilities. Breathing equipment is never outside a medic's responsibilities. Victor laughed once. You are not a medic anymore. The sentence landed in a place Victor could not see. For an instant, the cafeteria disappeared from Dan's face. The white lights became desert sun. The smell of stew became blood and dust. A young soldier lay on a folding table beneath a torn thermal blanket. His lungs filled unevenly. Dan pressed a mask against his face while someone shouted that the evacuation helicopter was delayed. Not enough oxygen, not enough blood, not enough time. Dan returned to the cafeteria without moving. You do not stop being a medic because someone changes your job title, he said. Victor looked at the pharmacy bag beneath Dan's arm, then at the napkin protruding from his jacket pocket. The purple star was visible. His eyes narrowed. That dinner was for your daughter. Dan said nothing. Mara looked from the folded bread to the bag. Victor continued. You requested schedule accommodations for her medical appointments. Dan's hand closed around the edge of the tray. That information is private. You submitted it through company channels. That does not give you the right to discuss it here. Victor turned slightly so the contractor's phone could capture his profile. You are accusing North Star of misconduct while asking North Star to excuse your own performance failures. My shift records are clean. Attendance is not the only measure of stability. The word struck harder than the others. Stability. Dan looked at Victor fully. Victor had read the family services documents attached to his emergency scheduling request. He knew about the county review. Mara saw the realization move through Dan's face. "What did you do?" she asked Victor. Victor ignored her. He spoke to Dan with the calm tone of a man discussing policy. "You have a child with chronic respiratory needs, a vehicle that is unreliable, inconsistent secondary employment, and a housing review already in progress." The cafeteria worker's hand rose to her mouth. The nurse turned around. Even the contractor lowered his phone slightly. Dan's voice became quieter. "Leave my daughter out of this." Victor tilted his head. "She is relevant to your judgment. She is 9 years old. And apparently waiting for the dinner you just gave away." Mara pushed the bowl toward Dan. "Take it." Dan did not look down. "Eat. I will not take food from a child. You are not taking it from her." Victor smiled. "Of course she is." Dan turned toward Mara. His voice softened. "My daughter has food." It was a lie, a kind one, the sort he had practiced until it came out without effort. Mara searched his face. "How much?" Dan did not answer. "How much food is at home?" Victor folded his arms. "This is becoming theatrical." Mara ignored him. Dan looked toward the rain. "There is an apple." The worker behind the counter closed her eyes. Mara's fingers tightened around the spoon. "And the bread in your pocket." "Yes." "That is all." Dan looked at her. "That is enough for tonight." Mara stood. "No." Dan placed one hand lightly on the table. "Sit down. You should take this home. You need it now. So does she. My daughter is warm." He glanced toward the windows. "You are not." 3 small words. No speech. No demand for gratitude. Mara sat again. Her eyes shone, but she looked down before anyone could study them. Victor stepped forward. "This conversation is over." Dan moved between Victor and the table. "She has not finished. She has not started." "Because you keep talking." The security officer inhaled sharply. The contractor raised his phone again. Victor looked at Dan's chest, then his hands. He was searching for aggression. Dan gave him none. That made Victor more dangerous. Men like Victor understood anger because anger could be documented. Anger could be clipped into a report framed in a meeting and shown to people who had not been present. Calm gave him less to use. Victor lowered his voice. "You think this makes you noble?" Dan looked at Mara's wet coat. "No." "Then what is the point?" Dan answered without hesitation. "She gets warm food for 10 minutes. Several people looked away. Not because he had condemned them, because he had not. Victor's face hardened. This woman entered a controlled medical facility without identification. She walked through an unlocked door. She has no legitimate purpose here. Eating is legitimate. This is not a public dining room. Then why is there a price above the counter? Victor stepped closer. "You have always had difficulty respecting boundaries." Dan's eyes narrowed. Victor continued. "The loading dock, disposal procedures, management authority. Now this. The only boundary I crossed was the one between watching and helping." The contractor shifted his grip on the phone. Mara raised the spoon. She took one bite. The stew was too salty and not hot enough. It was also the first thing she had eaten since morning. Warmth spread through her mouth and down her throat. Her body responded before her mind could control it. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second. Dan looked away. He gave her privacy even inside a crowded room. That small mercy reached her more deeply than the food. She had sat across from generals, senators, surgeons, and investors who calculated every gesture. Dan had given her his daughter's dinner and refused to watch her receive it. Victor saw none of that. He saw a man refusing to submit. "Security," he said. The young officer straightened. "Remove them both." The officer looked at Dan. Dan looked back. Neither moved. "Sir," the officer said carefully, "he paid for the meal." Victor's head turned. "That is irrelevant. He is an employee." "Exactly." The officer's hand fell away from his radio. Victor understood the hesitation. "You are assigned to facility security, not moral interpretation." The officer's face reddened. "Yes, sir." He stepped toward Dan. Mara put down the spoon. Dan raised one open hand. "I am not looking for trouble." Victor gave a short laugh. "Trouble seems to find you." Dan looked at the security officer. "She finishes the bowl. Then we leave." The officer glanced at Victor. Victor shook his head. "No." Mara looked at Dan. "You do not need to do this." "Yes." Why? Dan's hand lowered. "Because everyone else decided not to." The contractor caught every word. Victor's gaze moved toward the phone. A calculation passed through his face. He needed Dan to become angry. He needed something louder than what had happened. He looked at the pharmacy bag again. Is that her inhaler? Dan's expression changed. Victor had found the deepest place. Do not. Your daughter's medication. Stop. You spent the evening photographing company property, missed your transport, and now you are giving away her food. Dan took one step forward. The security officer moved between them. Victor continued from behind the officer. Family Services should see this. Mara stood so quickly the chair struck the wall. That is enough. Victor finally looked at her. The authority in her voice had escaped the disguise. For a second, something uncertain entered his face. Amelia felt it too. Her real name rose behind her teeth. She could end the scene. One sentence. I am Amelia Cross. The worker would straighten. Security would step back. Victor's expression would collapse. Phones would turn toward her. Apologies would arrive before she finished speaking. But the photographs in the envelope returned to her mind. The missing inhalers, the sealed dressings, the cargo van. If Victor knew who she was, he would stop performing. He would begin destroying. Amelia lowered her voice. Leave the child out of this. Victor studied her. Sit down. She did not. Dan placed himself slightly between them. Victor reached for the tray. Then the meal is finished. Dan caught his wrist. Not tightly. Just enough to stop the movement. The cafeteria changed. The security officer reached for Dan's arm. The contractor stepped sideways for a better angle. Victor pulled back. His sleeve struck the bowl. Ceramic scraped across the table. The stew tipped. For one suspended second, the bowl balanced on its edge. Then it fell. Brown liquid spread across the table, poured over the side, and struck the floor. Pieces of carrot and potato scattered across the tile. Hot broth splashed onto Amelia's coat and Dan's boots. The bowl hit hard. A crack split through the ceramic. The spoon spun beneath the table. No one spoke. The pharmacy bag slipped from beneath Dan's arm and landed beside his foot. Inside it, Lucy's inhaler struck the floor with a small plastic knock. Dan stared at the ruined meal. The contractor's phone remained raised. Victor adjusted his cuff. You assaulted a regional executive. Dan looked up. I stopped you from taking her food. You grabbed me. You reached across her. You created a safety incident. The words were already becoming a report. Dan saw it happening. Victor was turning the room into language he controlled. Mara stepped around the table. You knocked it over. Victor's gaze shifted to her. You saw him grab me. I saw you use a child to humiliate her father. That has nothing to do with what just happened. It has everything to do with it. The contractor moved closer. Victor noticed and softened his tone. Ma'am, this employee has a documented pattern of unstable behavior. Dan's face went still. Mara looked at Victor with an expression that would have frightened anyone who knew her real name. Victor only saw a poor woman becoming emotional. He dismissed her. Dan bent down. He retrieved the pharmacy bag first. He opened it and checked the inhaler. The plastic case was intact. Then he picked up the larger pieces of broken ceramic. Do not touch that, the security officer said. I will call environmental services. Dan placed the pieces inside the empty tray. Someone could step on it. It is not your job. Dan reached for a stack of napkins. It is on the floor. That does not make it your responsibility. Dan looked up at him. The officer heard his own sentence echoed back from earlier. His face changed. Dan knelt and pressed the napkins into the stew. Mara crouched beside him. He shook his head. You will get it on your hands. So will you. I have had worse. So have I. Dan looked at her. For a moment, the cafeteria disappeared between them. He saw something in her posture that did not belong to the coat. The balance, the control, the way she kept her knees clear of the broken ceramic without looking down. Training, not military infantry, medical. He recognized it because he carried the same habits in his body. You work trauma, he said quietly. Mara froze. Once. Where Victor's voice cut across them. Both of you need to leave. Dan returned to cleaning. Mara gathered the wet napkins. Victor looked at the security officer. Are you refusing a direct instruction? The officer stepped forward. Sir, they are leaving. As soon as the floor is safe. Victor stared at him. The officer's jaw tightened. It was a small act, Nothing heroic. Still, it cost him something. The worker came from behind the counter with a mop. I can finish. Dan stood. The knees of his work pants were soaked. He placed the broken ceramic on the tray. The worker looked at the ruined meal. I can make another bowl. Victor turned toward her. No. The word cracked through the room. The worker's hand tightened around the mop. Victor pointed toward the register. Return to your station. She did not move. Dan picked up the pharmacy bag. It is fine. No, she said. It is not. He gave her a tired smile. That does not mean you should lose your job. The worker looked down. Dan reached into his pocket and checked the wrapped cornbread. The napkin was damp along one edge, but the bread remained clean. The purple star had blurred slightly. Mara saw it. Victor stepped toward the corridor. I am documenting this entire incident. Mr. Reed, your facility access is suspended pending review. You do not supervise my site. I supervise the region. My shift ended. Your employment may have ended with it. The contractor's phone captured Dan's face. Dan did not react. Victor wanted fear. Dan gave him nothing. Come on, Dan said to Mara. She looked at the half-cleaned table. You should not have lost your dinner because of me. I did not lose it because of you. He picked up the empty paper cup and placed it on the tray. Then he reached into his pocket. 2 quarters remained. He set them near the register. The cafeteria worker stared at them. You do not need to leave a tip. Dan looked at the floor she would have to clean. Yes, I do. Victor laughed beneath his breath. Remarkable. Dan turned toward him. His voice stayed quiet. You should check the loading dock records from tonight. Victor's expression changed. Only Amelia noticed. Dan continued. White civilian van. No dispatch entry. Respiratory kits loaded at 8:40. Victor recovered quickly. You are confused. I photographed the plate. The room seemed to contract. Victor looked toward Dan's jacket, then toward the contractor's phone. Possession of restricted facility images is a security violation. Then the record should prove I am wrong. Victor stepped closer. Delete the photograph. Dan looked at him. No. The answer held no anger. That made it final. Dan opened the cafeteria door for Mara. Cold air moved through the room. She stepped into the corridor. He followed. Behind them, Victor spoke quietly to the contractor. Neither Dan nor Amelia heard the words. The contractor looked down at his phone and nodded. Outside the medical center, freezing rain cut across the parking area. Dan pulled his jacket tighter, then noticed Mara shaking. He removed it. You need this more. She looked at the warehouse uniform beneath it. You are already cold. I have a bus ride. So do I. He placed the jacket around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of machine oil, laundry, soap, and hospital stew. They crossed beneath the emergency entrance lights. An ambulance rushed past them, tires spraying water. Its rear doors opened before it stopped completely. 2 paramedics pulled out a stretcher, while a woman ran beside them shouting a name. Dan watched the patient disappear inside. His body leaned toward the emergency doors before he stopped himself. Mara noticed. You still miss it. What medicine? Dan looked toward the closed doors. I miss being useful. You were useful in there. He shook his head. I bought a bowl of stew. You protected someone. I failed to keep her fed. Mara pulled the jacket closed. You think only outcomes matter in emergency medicine? Outcomes are difficult to ignore. They walked toward the transit stop at the edge of the property. A damaged metal awning leaned over the bench. Rain dripped through a crack in the roof. Dan stood between Mara and the wind. She looked at the pharmacy bag. Your daughter has asthma. Yes. How severe? Usually controlled. Usually. Cold makes it worse, and your apartment is cold. Dan looked at her. You ask a lot of questions. You notice a lot of things. That kept people alive once. Maybe it still does. He checked the bus schedule posted beneath cloudy plastic. 23 minutes. Mara sat on the bench. Dan remained standing. Why did you file the complaint, she asked. The supplies were usable. That is not enough for most people. It should be. But it was not. Dan looked out at the loading dock behind Blackridge. Lucy had an asthma attack last winter. The pharmacy was waiting on authorization. We spent 6 hours in an emergency room for a medication that cost less than the paperwork surrounding it. Mara listened. 2 weeks later, I saw sealed inhalers in a disposal bin. His mouth tightened. I kept thinking about every parent waiting at a counter while those boxes sat in the rain. Did you tell your supervisor yes? What did he say to follow the reporting system? And you did. Yes. What happened? Nothing. The loading dock doors opened in the distance. White light spilled across the wet pavement. Dan straightened. A cargo van rolled slowly from the restricted area. White body, no company emblem. Rear windows darkened. Its headlights remained off. Dan moved closer to the curb. That is the van. Mara stood. The vehicle turned toward the service road. As it passed beneath a parking light, she saw the outline of medical crates stacked behind the rear glass. One label flashed into view. Respiratory Response Kit. The same product number from the anonymous photograph. Dan pulled out his phone. The screen was wet. He opened the camera. The van accelerated. He captured one image before it reached the street. Can you see the plate? Mara asked. Dan enlarged the photograph. Enough. The van's brake lights appeared once, then vanished into the storm. Mara looked toward the loading dock. Who had access to that shipment? Regional operations, contract logistics, site security. Victor. He has access to everything. The bus lights appeared beyond the intersection. Dan put the phone away. Mara looked at him. Do not delete that photograph. I was not planning to. Keep a second copy. Why? She held his gaze. Because men who change records do not stop with records. The bus approached. Its brakes released a long metallic hiss. Dan stepped back to let Mara board first. She paused at the door. What is your daughter's name, Lucy? Mara nodded. Tell Lucy I am sorry. For what? For the dinner. Dan touched the folded bread in his pocket. She would have given it to you herself. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she boarded. Dan waited until the doors closed. Through the wet glass, she watched him standing beneath the damaged awning without a jacket. He raised one hand. The bus pulled away. Inside the Blackridge cafeteria, the contractor uploaded a video before the spilled stew had been fully cleaned from the floor. The recording did not begin with Mara being refused food. It did not show Dan counting coins. It did not show the purple star on the napkin. It did not include Victor discussing Lucy's medical condition or family services review. The video began with Dan holding Victor's wrist. It showed the bowl falling. It showed the security officer stepping forward. It ended with Dan standing over the broken ceramic while Victor spoke in a controlled voice. The contractor added a caption. Disgruntled former Army medic threatens North Star executive inside Veterans Medical Center. He posted it to a local community account. Within 12 minutes, another account shared it. Within 20 strangers began deciding what kind of man Daniel Reed was. Some called him unstable. Some called him entitled. One person wrote that veterans like him used their service to excuse violent behavior. Another asked why a father with a sick child was wasting money in a hospital cafeteria. No one asked what had happened before the camera started. At 11:58, Dan reached his apartment. The hallway light had burned out again. He climbed the stairs by touch and opened the door quietly. Lucy was asleep at the kitchen table. Her head rested on folded arms beside the two empty bowls. The apple had been cut into thin slices and divided between them. She had eaten only 2 pieces. Dan stood in the doorway holding the pharmacy bag. The apartment felt colder than the street. He took the inhaler from the bag and placed it beside her drawing. Then he unwrapped the half-piece of cornbread. The edge was damp. The purple star had bled into the napkin. Dan broke the bread into 2 pieces and placed one beside Lucy's hand. His phone began to vibrate. Marcus Bell. Dan answered quietly. Hello? Marcus did not speak at first. In the background, Dan could hear warehouse machinery and a reversing alarm. Dan Marcus said, Where are you? Home. Good. Dan looked at Lucy. What happened? Marcus exhaled. A video from Blackridge is spreading. I know someone was recording. Victor filed an incident report. Dan closed his eyes. What does it say? Threatening behavior. Physical contact with an executive. Unauthorized photography of restricted medical inventory. I never threatened him. I believe you. Did you see the full video? There is no full video attached. Dan looked at the inhaler on the table. Marcus continued. Corporate security revoked your badge. For how long pending review? My shift starts tomorrow night. You cannot enter the property. What about my pay? Another pause, frozen until they make a determination. Dan stared at the overdue electric notice near Lucy's drawing. Marcus, I'm sorry. You saw the van. I saw a loading operation. You saw the crates. I did not inspect them. You know they were not on the board. Marcus lowered his voice. Do not discuss this over the phone. Dan walked toward the window. A dark sedan sat across the street with its lights off. He could not tell whether anyone was inside. Did Victor ask about the photograph? Yes. The room seemed to lose another degree of warmth. What did you tell him? That I did not know whether you took one. Did he believe you? No. Lucy stirred at the table. Dan turned away from the window. Marcus spoke again. Back up everything you have. Dan looked at his phone. You told me to delete it. I was wrong. The line became quiet. Then Marcus said the words carefully. Do not let them take the only copy. The call ended. Dan remained beside the window. Across the street, the sedan's engine started. Its headlights came on. The vehicle pulled away slowly and disappeared at the corner. Behind him, Lucy lifted her head. Dad Dan put the phone in his pocket and forced warmth into his voice. Hey, Luce. She saw the bread. Is that dinner? He looked at the purple star blurred across the damp napkin. Yes. Lucy smiled sleepily. Did you remember the butter Dan sat beside her and broke the final piece of cornbread in half? No. She leaned against his shoulder. That is okay. Outside, freezing rain tapped against the window. On the kitchen table, Lucy's inhaler rested beside the photograph of an unmarked van carrying medical crates into the dark. Daniel Reed stared at both objects while his daughter ate the final piece of cornbread. Lucy chewed slowly, saving each bite as if patience could make food last longer. Her hair fell across one eye. Dan reached over and tucked it behind her ear. You are not eating, she said. I had some at work. She looked at him. Dan had seen that look in wounded soldiers who knew the medic was lying to keep them calm. Lucy broke off a small piece and held it toward him. We share things here. His throat tightened. He accepted it. The bread was cold and damp, but he ate as though it were enough. At 6:15 the next morning, his phone vibrated against the table. Dan had not slept. He had spent the night copying the photograph of the van to an old laptop, a memory card, and an email account he had not used since leaving the Army. He also photographed Lucy's pharmacy receipt after writing the license plate number across the back. The new message carried the North Star emblem. Effective. Immediately, Daniel Reed was suspended pending an internal security review. His badge had been deactivated. His wages were frozen. His company health benefits would remain active only while his employment status was under review. Dan read the final sentence 3 times. The apartment heater coughed behind him. Lucy slept on the couch beneath 2 blankets, one hand curled near the inhaler on the floor. He called Marcus. The supervisor answered in a whisper. You got the notice? Yes. I tried to delay it. Who signed it? Regional Security. Victor. His authorization is attached. Dan looked at the dark window. What are they saying? I stole confidential shipping data, controlled inventory images, internal dispatch information. I took one photograph from a public employee lane. I know. You saw the van. Marcus was silent. Dan lowered his voice. Those kits left without a dispatch record. I know. Then say it. I have a wife and 2 boys. The words arrived quietly. Dan closed his eyes. Marcus continued. They interviewed me before dawn, 2 security officers and a lawyer. They already had a statement prepared. What did you sign? Nothing. Dan opened his eyes. Marcus breathed through the line. I told them I needed counsel. That answer cost something. Dan knew it. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. They asked for your home address. Dan turned toward Lucy. Why, they said company property may be in your possession. My phone belongs to me. They are calling the photographs protected material. Medical supplies disappearing into an unmarked van are not protected from the people they are supposed to save. Dan. Marcus's voice tightened. Do not open the door for anyone without a warrant. The call ended. At 8:27, another number appeared on Dan's screen. County Family Services. He let it ring twice before answering. This is Daniel Reed. Mr. Reed, this is Elaine Porter. He recognized the name from the review notice. Her voice was calm and carefully measured. I need to speak with you about updated information received by our office. Dan looked at the 2 empty bowls on the table. What information? A report involving an incident at Blackridge Veterans Medical Center. We also received notice that your employment status has changed. Who contacted you? I cannot disclose the source at this stage. Victor. Dan did not need proof to feel the name. Elaine continued. The current review already includes concerns regarding income stability, food access, and housing conditions. A suspension from employment may affect the assessment. I was suspended because I reported missing medical supplies. I understand that is your account. It is the truth. I am not determining workplace facts, Mr. Reed. I am assessing Lucy's immediate safety. Dan looked toward the couch. Lucy's eyes were open. She had been listening. What do you need? Proof of continuing medical coverage, an updated employment statement, current utility status and documentation showing regular access to food. How long do I have? 72 hours for the initial documents. Dan stared at the overdue electric notice. What happens after 72 hours? We review the information. That is not what I asked. Elaine paused. If we identify an immediate risk, temporary protective measures may be considered. Lucy sat up. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. Dan turned toward the window so she would not see his face. She is safe here. I hope the documents support that. The call ended. For several seconds, the apartment held only the rattle of the heater. Lucy spoke from behind him. Are they taking me somewhere? Dan turned. No. The answer came too fast. She watched him carefully. Mom said you should not lie when someone is scared. Dan crossed the room and knelt in front of her. I am going to fix this. Can they take me? He wanted to build a wall from certainty. He had no bricks. They are asking questions because we do not have food. Because adults sometimes confuse struggling with failing. Lucy looked toward the inhaler. Did you fail? Dan took both her hands. No. She studied his face. Then she nodded, choosing to believe him because she had nowhere safer to place the fear. 40 miles north, Amelia Cross entered North Star headquarters through the underground garage. She still wore the green coat. Rain had dried in pale marks along the sleeves. Her hair was pulled back, but several damp strands clung to her neck. Rachel Boone waited beside the elevator with a tablet and 2 cups of coffee. She looked at the coat. You stayed out all night. I took the bus back. Rachel handed her a cup. The video is everywhere. The elevator doors closed around them. Rachel opened the first clip. Dan appeared on the screen holding Victor's wrist. The bowl fell. A security officer moved forward. The image stopped before anyone could see Dan kneel. A caption called him unstable. Another account described him as a violent former medic. A National Veterans page had reposted the clip with a question about North Star employee safety. Victor's office drafted a response. Rachel said, What does it say? That a distressed employee physically confronted a senior executive during an unauthorized disturbance. Freeze it. It was scheduled for release at 9. What time is it? 8:41. Who approved it, Victor? Amelia looked at the floor display as the elevator climbed. Cancel the release. Lock every related file, no deletion permissions. He will know. He already knows someone saw the van. The doors opened onto the executive floor. 2 assistants rose when Amelia stepped out. Their eyes moved to the coat, then away. Amelia walked into the secure conference room. Get me every camera from Blackridge. Rachel followed. Cafeteria, emergency corridor, parking lot, loading dock badge, access vehicle, entry and audio. Some of that requires legal preservation, then preserve it. Rachel made the call. The first video arrived 26 minutes later. Amelia stood before a wall of screens while Rachel arranged the timestamps. The cafeteria appeared from 4 angles. There was Mara Cole in the corner. There was the worker refusing food. There was Victor entering through the staff corridor. There was Dan counting coins at the register. Amelia watched him buy the stew. She watched him ask for butter because Lucy liked to spread it herself. The sound in the conference room was clear enough to hear the coins touch the counter. Victor's voice followed. She is not a patient. She is not registered. She has no legitimate reason to remain. Amelia watched herself stand. Then Dan crossed the room. He placed the tray before her. She is hungry. That does not make her your responsibility. No, it makes her hungry. Rachel stopped writing. The footage continued. Victor mentioned Dan's complaint. Respiratory kits, pediatric inhalers, trauma dressings. Amelia heard Dan ask for the contamination report. She watched Victor avoid the answer. Then Victor spoke about Lucy. Medical appointments, unstable housing, family services. Amelia's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. He accessed protected employee information, Rachel said. He weaponized it in public. The bowl fell. The public clip ended there. The security footage did not. Dan checked Lucy's inhaler. He collected the broken ceramic. He cleaned the floor. He placed 2 quarters beside the register. Amelia lowered her eyes. Rachel looked at the paused image. He left a tip. Yes. After they threw away his dinner. Yes. Amelia's voice had become very quiet. Show me the parking lot. The screen changed. Dan and Mara walked through freezing rain. He removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. They reached the transit stop. Then the loading dock opened in the distance. The white van emerged without headlights. Rachel paused the footage as it passed beneath a security lamp. Medical crates were visible behind the rear glass. She enlarged the image. One product label came into focus. Respiratory Response Kit. Rachel compared the number with the photograph from the anonymous envelope. It matches. Track the vehicle. The plate is partially obscured. Dan photographed it. Rachel looked at Amelia. Victor knows that. The loading dock records arrived next. The official system showed no outgoing shipment at the time the van left. Badge access logs showed the dock doors had been opened using a regional override code. The authorization belonged to Victor's office. Rachel opened the disposal database. 3 respiratory kit lots were listed as destroyed 2 days earlier. The destruction certificate bore the signature of a contractor named Paul Henson. Rachel searched the contractor registry. Paul Henson had died 11 months before signing the document. The room became still. Pull every certificate with his name, Amelia said. There were 47, all filed after his death. Rachel opened another record. Pediatric inhalers, classified as contaminated. No laboratory report attached. Trauma dressings, classified as compromised packaging. Warehouse photographs showed intact seals. Emergency nutrition packs, marked destroyed. Cafeteria waste logs showed none received. Amelia looked across the screens. This was not carelessness. It was a system. Someone was marking usable supplies for disposal, removing them from inventory and transporting them outside approved channels. Rachel accessed finance records. A disposal subcontractor had received unusual payments from a medical reseller based in Wyoming. The reseller had recently supplied emergency products to private clinics at prices far above contract cost. They are selling the inventory, Rachel said, or moving it through someone who is. A notification appeared on the main screen. Blackridge respiratory inventory below critical threshold. Replacement shipment delayed by weather. Rachel opened the alert. A mountain clinic west of Colorado Springs had requested emergency kits after a highway collision involving 12 vehicles. Blackridge could not fulfill the request. The missing supplies were no longer numbers inside an audit. Patients were waiting for them. Amelia turned from the screen. Secure the regional warehouse. Rachel picked up the phone. Through Victor's chain are independent security. What reason suspected diversion of controlled medical inventory? Rachel made the call. 3 minutes later, she lowered the phone. Victor issued an emergency disposal order 20 minutes ago for what archived shipping records and remaining respiratory inventory. Amelia looked toward the clock. We're Distribution Center 7. Dan's warehouse. Seal every loading dock. Security teams need authorization. Amelia took Rachel's phone. This is Dr. Cross. No vehicle leaves Distribution Center 7. Preserve every file, every terminal, every crate, and every camera record. Anyone attempting to override the order is to be identified and removed from access. She ended the call. Her office phone rang immediately. Victor. Amelia answered. Where are the respiratory kits? Silence. Then Victor spoke. Amelia, there appears to be confusion involving standard disposal procedures. There are 47 destruction certificates signed by a dead man. Another pause. I have not reviewed those files. Your override code opened the dock. Regional codes are used by several managers. Name them. I will need time. You had 6 weeks after Daniel Reed filed his complaint. Victor's voice hardened. Reed is unstable. He assaulted me in a medical facility. I watched the full footage. The silence changed. Amelia could almost hear him recalculating. You were there, he said. Yes. As the woman in the cafeteria. Yes. Victor breathed once. You created a dangerous situation without notifying security. You created it long before I arrived." He lowered his voice. "We should discuss this privately. We are. No, face to face. After the warehouse is secured." The call ended from his side. Rachel looked at Amelia. He knows the evidence exists. He also knows Dan has the clearest image of the van. At that moment, Dan stood in his apartment bathroom holding Lucy's inhaler beneath the light. The dose counter showed 2 remaining uses. Cold air had entered through the bedroom window during the night. Lucy's breathing had become shallow and tight. Dan guided her to sit upright on the couch. Slow breath. She pressed the inhaler to her lips. 1 dose, he said. She breathed in. He counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Dan listened to her lungs with an old stethoscope from his field kit. The wheeze remained. He looked at the phone. No paycheck, no vehicle, 2 doses. A knock struck the apartment door. 3 hard impacts. Lucy flinched. Dan stood. Another knock. Daniel Reed, North Star Corporate Security. Dan moved toward the window. 2 dark vehicles sat outside. A man waited near the stairwell entrance. The voice came again. "We are here to recover company property." Dan took the memory card from the laptop and slipped it beneath the sole of his boot. He placed the pharmacy receipt with the van's license number inside Lucy's drawing folder. Then he called Marcus. No answer. He called County Family Services. Voicemail. He opened the final number Rachel Boone had used when contacting him months earlier about a scheduling complaint. The call connected. Rachel answered. "Daniel Reed, they are at my door. Do not open it. They say they are corporate security. They do not have authority to search your home." Lucy coughed behind him. Rachel heard it. "Is that your daughter? She's having trouble breathing. How much medication remains? 1 dose?" Rachel's voice sharpened. "Keep her sitting upright. I am sending medical transport and independent security." A fist struck the door again. The frame shook. "Mr. Reed's refusal to cooperate may be treated as destruction of evidence." Dan looked at Lucy. Her small hands gripped the blanket. He moved between her and the door. His voice carried through the wood. "My daughter is in respiratory distress. You are blocking medical access." The hallway became quiet. Then a different voice answered. "Open the door, and we can assist." Dan recognized the tone. The same controlled language Victor had used in the cafeteria. He placed one hand against the lock. "Show me a warrant." No one answered. Behind him, Lucy drew another thin breath. Dan tightened his grip on the phone as the metal around the lock began to move. The metal around the lock began to move. Dan stepped closer to the door. Lucy sat on the couch behind him, one hand pressed against her chest, the other gripping the edge of the blanket. Her breathing came in short pulls. Each breath seemed to stop before it reached the bottom of her lungs. Rachel Boone remained on the phone. "Dan, listen carefully. Medical transport is approaching from the south entrance. Independent security is less than 4 minutes away. They are trying to force the lock. Do not touch anyone unless they enter." Dan looked at the chain stretched across the door. "They are not here for company property." "I know." A metal tool scraped against the frame. The man outside spoke again. "Mr. Reed, open the door. We have authorization to retrieve restricted materials. Show it through the gap. There is no need to escalate this." Dan almost laughed. The words were always the same. Calm language, controlled voices, a threat dressed as procedure. He placed the phone on speaker and set it on the table. "Lucy, look at me." She raised her eyes. Slow breath in. She tried. The wheeze sharpened. Dan crossed to the couch and knelt. He checked the dose counter again. 1, only 1. He shook the inhaler, fitted it to the spacer, and held the mask gently against her face. Deep breath. Lucy inhaled. Again. She tried. The medicine entered in a thin mist. Dan counted slowly while listening to the pressure against the door. 1, 2, 3. The lock jerked. 4, 5. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. A voice shouted from the hallway, "Step away from the door." The metal stopped moving. Another voice answered. "North Star Corporate Security, Independent Security Division. Hands where we can see them." Dan kept his eyes on Lucy. Her shoulders lowered slightly. The wheeze remained. Rachel spoke through the phone. "They are there." Dan listened. Commands passed through the hallway. Shoes scraped against the floor. Someone protested that the search had been approved by regional operations. Another voice asked for the written authority. None was produced. A siren rose outside the building. Red light moved across the ceiling. The apartment door remained closed. Lucy looked toward the window. Is that for me? Yes. Are we in trouble? No. Dan placed one hand against her cheek. You are getting help. 2 gentle knocks followed. Mr. Reed, this is Paramedic Collins. We were called for a pediatric respiratory emergency. Dan checked through the peephole. 2 paramedics stood behind a uniformed independent security officer. The corporate team had been moved against the far wall. Dan opened the door without removing the chain. The lead paramedic showed identification. Dan released the chain. The medical team entered. One paramedic knelt beside Lucy while the other opened a respiratory kit. Dan saw the label. North Star Defense Medical. For a moment he stared at it. The same type of kit he had watched disappear into the van. The paramedic fitted an oxygen mask over Lucy's face. History of asthma, yes. Known trigger. Cold air, stress, medication given 1 rescue dose. The paramedic listened to her lungs. Air movement is limited. Dan knew the tone. Professional, focused. Not panic, but close enough to urgency that every movement became exact. A nebulizer was prepared. The machine began to hum. Mist gathered inside the mask. Lucy reached for Dan's hand. He gave it to her. In the hallway, an independent security officer photographed the damaged lock. The corporate team spoke into phones, each man trying to sound as if he had expected the intervention. Rachel's voice came through the speaker. Dan, I am coming to Blackridge. He looked at the phone. You know where we are going. Your daughter needs emergency evaluation. The paramedics will choose the nearest appropriate facility. That is Blackridge. Yes. The irony did not need to be spoken. Dan looked at Lucy. The color in her face was improving. Her breaths were still shallow but less desperate. The lead paramedic glanced at him. We are transporting. Dan nodded. I am coming. As they moved Lucy toward the stairs, one of the corporate security men stepped forward. Mr. Reed, your phone and laptop remain subject to preservation. The independent officer blocked him. He is accompanying his daughter. This involves protected company property. Dan stopped. The stretcher waited halfway through the doorway. He looked at the corporate officer. My daughter could not breathe while you were cutting through my lock. We were not informed of a medical emergency. You heard her coughing. The officer said nothing. Dan continued. You do not touch my home. You do not touch my devices. You do not come near my daughter again. The independent officer raised one hand. That is enough. Dan followed the stretcher down the stairs. Outside, cold rain struck the ambulance roof. Lucy was loaded inside. Dan climbed in beside her. Through the rear window, he watched the corporate team standing beneath the broken stairwell light. One of them lifted a phone, not to call for help, to report failure. The ambulance moved through Colorado Springs with its siren cutting a path through morning traffic. Inside, the world narrowed to numbers: oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, pulse, air movement. Dan watched the monitor and remembered 1,000 other screens. Field monitors under canvas, trauma bays under red emergency lights, helicopter displays shaking during evacuation. He had once trusted numbers because they forced people to admit when a body was failing. Now numbers had become the language used to erase people. Lucy's oxygen level climbed. The paramedic adjusted the nebulizer. Better. Dan nodded. Lucy looked at him through the mask. Are you coming with me? I am right here. Do not go to work. I am not going anywhere. At Blackridge, the ambulance entered through the same emergency doors Dan had watched the night before. A pediatric team met them. Lucy was transferred to a treatment bay. Dan walked beside the stretcher until a nurse stopped him at the threshold. We need space for 1 minute. I am her father. I know. We are helping her breathe. Dan stood beyond the curtain. His hands were empty. That frightened him more than blood ever had. Across the corridor, a television played the edited cafeteria video without sound. Dan saw himself gripping Victor's wrist. The bowl fell. The image reset. A banner beneath it read, North Star investigates employee confrontation. The nurse at the station looked from the television to Dan. Recognition moved through her face. She lowered the volume. Dan looked away. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later. She wore a dark coat over office clothes and carried a sealed document case. An investigator walked beside her. Dan recognized Rachel from a video conference months earlier. She had listened while he described scheduling problems and never contacted him again. He remained near Lucy's curtain. "You work for North Star." Rachel stopped several feet away. "Yes, so did the men at my apartment. They were acting under Victor Shaw's regional authority." "That does not answer me." "No." She placed the document case on an empty chair. "I work for Amelia Cross." Dan's expression hardened. "That is the same company. Today it is a different chain of command." Dan looked toward Lucy. The nebulizer continued humming behind the curtain. "You let them suspend me." "I did not know about the suspension until after it was issued. You knew about my complaint. I knew you submitted a scheduling appeal. You closed it. I forwarded it to Regional Review, Victor's office. Rachel accepted the accusation." "Yes." Dan stepped closer. "And he used it to threaten my daughter in a cafeteria." Rachel did not defend herself. "That happened because our system sent private information to the person you were reporting." Dan stared at her. Most executives used apology as armor. Rachel did not. She continued, "That failure belongs to North Star. You do not have to trust me, but the evidence you kept is now connected to a live medical supply diversion." Dan looked toward the document case. "What did you find? False disposal records? Dead signatories, unauthorized transport, inventory removed through regional override codes. The van, yes. Where were the kits going?" "We do not know yet." Dan's jaw tightened. "You had 6 weeks." Rachel held his gaze. "You were right for 6 weeks. We started listening this morning. A doctor emerged from Lucy's treatment bay. Mr. Reed." Dan turned immediately. The doctor removed her gloves. "Her breathing is improving. We are keeping her for observation while the medication continues." "Will she need admission?" "Not if she maintains this response. Any sign of infection?" "Not at the moment." Dan released a breath. The doctor looked at Rachel and the investigator, then back at him. "Try to keep the room quiet." After she left, Dan entered the bay. Lucy lay beneath a warmed blanket with oxygen tubing beneath her nose. Color had returned to her cheeks. She looked at Rachel. "Are you the boss?" Rachel almost smiled. "No." "Do you work for the hungry lady?" Rachel glanced at Dan. "Yes." Lucy's eyes widened. "She has a job." Dan sat beside her. "She has a very big job." Lucy considered that. "Then why did nobody feed her?" The room became still. Rachel answered softly, "Because having a job does not make people see you." Lucy looked at Dan. He saw her. "Yes," Rachel said. "He did." Dan touched Lucy's hair. "Rest." She closed her eyes. Rachel waited until Lucy's breathing settled. Then she placed a tablet on the counter. "We need your photograph." Dan did not reach for it. "Why the plate is clearer than the parking camera. What happens if I give it to you? It becomes part of a protected investigation. And who controls that investigation? Independent counsel outside security and government contract officers. Victor numbers Amelia. She authorized preservation, not conclusions." Dan studied Rachel. "You expect me to believe the CEO is investigating her own company?" Rachel looked through the glass toward the corridor. "She spent last night wearing the coat Victor ordered into the storm." Dan's eyes narrowed. "What, the woman you fed was Dr. Amelia Cross?" For several seconds, Dan did not move. He heard the nebulizer machine, a cart rolling outside, rain against the window. Mara's voice beneath the damaged awning. "Men who change records do not stop with records." Dan looked at Rachel. "She lied to me. She concealed her identity. That is a polished way to say it. Yes." "Did she know who I was?" "Not until Victor said your name." Dan looked at Lucy. "So the whole thing was a test?" "No." Rachel's answer came quickly. "She was investigating the company. She did not know you would enter the cafeteria." Dan remembered Mara pushing the bowl back. "Someone is waiting for you." He remembered the way she moved around broken ceramic. Trauma training. He had seen it. He had simply never imagined how far the disguise reached. "She watched him threaten my daughter. She was gathering evidence." Dan turned toward Rachel. "She could have stopped him." "Yes." The honesty struck harder than an excuse. Rachel continued. "She has not defended that choice." Dan looked away. "What does she want from me? The photograph." "Your statement. your permission to use the full cafeteria footage publicly. And after that, she wants the board in one room before Victor destroys anything else. Dan took out his phone. He opened the image. The van appeared beneath the loading light. The plate was blurred by rain, but readable. He sent it to Rachel. Then he removed the memory card from his boot. This has copies of everything I filed. Rachel accepted it carefully. Why keep it in your shoe? Because men were cutting through my door. The investigator placed the card in an evidence sleeve. Rachel looked at Lucy. We can arrange protection outside the room. Dan shook his head. No uniforms near her. Understood. And nobody uses her name in a statement. Understood. No photographs. Agreed. Dan looked at the television in the corridor. The full video goes out. Rachel nodded. All of it. Not after the board decides how it makes them look. All of it. Dan sat again. Then take the evidence. At North Star headquarters, the emergency board meeting began at 11:30. The main operations room had no windows. Screens covered 3 walls. Medical logistics maps glowed across one side. Weather alerts, facility status, and supply requests moved in continuous columns. Victor sat near the center of the table. His tie was perfectly aligned. A legal folder rested before him. 2 attorneys sat to his right. The communications director sat to his left. Regional managers joined by secure video. Victor had already prepared the room. On the main screen appeared a still image of Dan gripping his wrist. Daniel Reed has a documented pattern of boundary violations. Victor said, unauthorized photography, interference with secure logistics, emotional instability connected to personal financial stress. The communications director glanced at the prepared statement. We should avoid discussing his family. His family situation is relevant to motive. One attorney looked up. How Victor turned a page. He is under pressure. Employees under pressure sometimes create allegations to protect themselves from discipline. The door opened. Amelia entered wearing the army green coat. Conversation stopped. Water stains marked the cuffs. A dark spot from the spilled stew remained near the pocket. Victor stood halfway. Amelia, sit down. He remained standing for 1 second too long. Then he lowered himself into the chair. Rachel entered behind Amelia with the investigator and the sealed evidence case. Amelia walked to the head of the table. No diamond watch, no tailored jacket, no polished shield. She placed the empty paper cup from the cafeteria beside Victor's legal folder. The room watched her. Victor looked at the cup. What is this? The woman you ordered into the storm. No one spoke. Amelia removed the knitted cap from her coat pocket and placed it beside the cup. That woman was me. The communications director slowly lowered her pen. One attorney looked at Victor. Victor's face remained controlled, but the color beneath his eyes changed. Amelia looked around the table. Last night I entered 4 North Star facilities without my name, my office, or my identification. I was refused a chair, followed by security, denied water, and removed from waiting areas that were nearly empty. A director shifted in his seat. Amelia continued. At Blackridge, Victor Shaw ordered staff not to feed me. Victor leaned forward. You concealed your identity inside a secure medical facility. Yes, that created legal and operational risk. So did stealing respiratory equipment. The room froze. Victor's mouth closed. Amelia picked up the remote. The edited video appeared on the screen. Dan gripped Victor's wrist. The bowl fell. The image stopped. This is the clip North Star prepared to answer. She clicked again. The full cafeteria footage began. The room heard Victor's voice. Do not serve her. She is not a patient. She is not registered. She has no legitimate reason to remain. No one at the table moved. The video showed Amelia standing. Dan entered. He counted coins. He asked for butter. He carried the tray across the room. She is hungry. That does not make her your responsibility. No, it makes her hungry. The communications director turned the prepared statement face down. The footage continued. Victor named Dan's daughter. He described her medical condition. He mentioned family services. One attorney closed his folder. Victor interrupted. This material is incomplete. Amelia looked at him. It has 4 camera angles and continuous audio. It does not show Reed's prior behavior. Then we will examine that next. On the screen, the bowl fell. Dan knelt. He picked up broken ceramic. He cleaned the floor. He left 2 quarters beside the register. The final cafeteria frame froze on the napkin inside Dan's pocket. A purple star blurred by rain. Amelia faced the room. The public was shown 19 seconds. North Star possessed 43 minutes. Victor folded his hands. None of this changes the fact that Reed touched me. You reached across a hungry woman to remove a meal he purchased. He physically restrained an executive. He stopped your hand. He had no authority. Amelia's voice lowered. Neither did you. Rachel stepped toward the second screen. Daniel Reed filed an inventory complaint 6 weeks ago. The complaint appeared. Dates, lot numbers, photographs, vehicle descriptions. Victor's response appeared beneath it. Unsubstantiated. Employee acting outside assigned responsibilities. Closed 17 minutes after submission. Rachel displayed the disposal certificates. 47 records carry the signature of Paul Henson. One board member adjusted his glasses. Who is Paul Henson? A subcontractor who died 11 months before these documents were signed. The next screen showed pediatric inhalers inside a waste container, then trauma dressings, then respiratory kits, all sealed, all within approved dates, all classified as destroyed. Victor looked at the attorneys. Those products may have failed inspection. Rachel displayed the quality control system. No contamination reports exist. Then they may have been removed from the database. That would also be a violation. Victor turned toward Amelia. You are presenting preliminary information as fact. Amelia nodded to Rachel. The parking footage played. The unmarked van left Blackridge. Dan's photograph appeared beside it. The plate matched a vehicle registered to Frontier Medical Resale in Cheyenne. Financial records filled the screen. Payments moved from a North Star disposal contractor to the reseller. The reseller had sold identical respiratory kits to private clinics at nearly 4 times the contract price. Victor leaned back. This proves activity by a subcontractor. Rachel opened the badge log. Regional override authorization released the shipment. Victor's code appeared. He looked toward the managers on the video wall. Codes can be shared. Amelia answered. Your code required biometric confirmation. Victor said nothing. An alert sounded from the operations display. Red text spread across the central screen. Emergency respiratory request. Multiple vehicle collision. 12 patients. Mountain Clinic inventory critical. Blackridge unable to fulfill. The room changed. This was no longer a discussion about reputation. A medical operations officer answered the alert. Blackridge reports no reserve kits. Rachel looked at the inventory list. The missing lot was allocated to that clinic. The officer turned toward Amelia. Replacement shipment is delayed by the storm. How many kits available within Ground Range 6 at Fort Carson Partner Storage? 8 in Pueblo. Weather may slow both routes. Move them. Contract approval is required. You have it. The roads are closing. Use state escort. The officer began issuing instructions. Victor stood. We cannot redirect military contract inventory without written release. Amelia looked at him. Patients are waiting. That does not remove compliance. No. It activates emergency authority. Victor reached for his folder. I will not participate in a reckless decision. Independent security moved toward the door. Victor stopped. The security director spoke. Mr. Shaw, your facility access has been revoked. Victor stared at Amelia. You cannot treat unverified allegations as a conviction. I am not convicting you. Amelia stood. I am terminating your employment. Your devices and records are being preserved. All relevant material is being transferred to state investigators, federal contract officers, and outside counsel. Victor looked around the room. No one met his eyes. He turned toward the screen showing Dan's cafeteria image. You think he is a hero? Dan appeared live from the hospital through a secure connection. Lucy slept beyond the edge of the camera. Dan looked directly at Victor. I was trying to keep inhalers out of a dumpster. Victor's face tightened. Dan continued. You turned that into a threat because the truth was cheaper to bury than the supplies were to replace. Victor stepped toward the door. Independent security blocked him. For the first time, his voice rose. This company cannot be run on emotion. Amelia looked at the medical alert still flashing behind him. This company exists because bodies fail. Victor said nothing. If hunger, illness, and preventable harm are too emotional for you, then you never understood the work. Security escorted him from the room. The door closed. No one applauded. The operations officer called out an update. First respiratory shipment is moving from Fort Carson. State Patrol has opened a corridor. Amelia faced the board. Victor built the mechanism. North Star gave him the space. One director shifted. We did not know. Amelia looked at him. We approved cost targets without asking what disappeared to meet them. Another director spoke. The regional reports were falsified, and we rewarded them because the numbers were clean. The room remained silent. Amelia continued. Effective immediately, every medical disposal record enters independent review. Every retaliation complaint bypasses regional management. Executive bonuses tied only to cost reduction are suspended. Open ration access is restored at every North Star facility today. An attorney lifted one hand. We should consider the liability of immediate restoration. Amelia looked toward the empty paper cup. We already know the liability of removing it. The communications director opened a blank document. What do we say publicly? The truth. All of it? All of it. That will damage the company. Amelia looked at the paused frame of Dan cleaning the floor. The company was damaged before the video existed. The full footage was released at 2:14 that afternoon. North Star attached no music, no slogan, no edited statement. Only the complete recording, the corrected timeline, and an acknowledgement that Daniel Reed had been falsely portrayed. Public reaction changed almost immediately. The same accounts that had called Dan unstable began deleting posts. Veterans demanded answers about the missing supplies. Medical workers asked how many other complaints had been ignored. Some people apologized. Others acted as if they had always supported him. Dan watched none of it. He sat beside Lucy while a nurse removed the oxygen tubing. Her breathing had stabilized. The doctor explained that she could likely return home that evening if the next observation period remained clear. Rachel entered carrying a folder. Dan looked at it. Another report. A reinstatement order. She placed it on the table. Your suspension is lifted. Back pay is approved. Your employment record will show that the allegations were unsupported. Dan did not open the folder. What about Marcus placed under protection while investigators interview him? The cafeteria worker suspended by Victor's office this morning. That action has been reversed. The security officer still employed. Dan looked at Lucy. And Family Services. North Star sent a correction confirming that the report about your employment was connected to a retaliatory action. That does not erase the review. No. Rachel sat across from him. Amelia knows that. Dan looked toward the hallway. Where is she in Denver? Cleaning up, trying to. Dan touched the edge of the folder. What does she want to apologize in person? I do not need a camera. There will not be one. I do not need a check. The back pay is not a gift. I do not need to become a commercial. Rachel nodded. She expects you to say that. Dan opened the folder. Beneath the reinstatement notice was a proposal for a paid advisory role in North Star's medical surplus and emergency meal program. He closed it again. I loaded trucks. You also identified a diversion network that passed 3 audits. That does not make me an executive. No. Rachel glanced at Lucy. It makes you someone who noticed the patient at the far end of the supply chain. Dan looked at the proposal. What is the company calling the program? They have not named it. Good. Rachel almost smiled. Why names come before systems when people care more about the announcement than the work? Lucy opened her eyes. Dad? Dan turned. She looked at Rachel. Did they fire the mean man? Rachel answered carefully. He does not work there anymore. Lucy considered this. Did he say sorry? No. Then how does he know he was wrong? Dan looked at his daughter. Rachel did not answer. Lucy's eyes moved to the folder. Are you going back? Dan rested his hand over hers. I do not know. Will there be food at work for people? Dan looked toward the window. Snow had begun replacing the rain. I am going to ask. That evening, the first emergency respiratory shipment reached the mountain clinic under state escort. The medical operations officer sent a brief confirmation. Kits received. All 12 collision patients stabilized for transfer. Amelia read the message alone in the boardroom. The empty cup remained on the table. Rachel called from Blackridge. Lucy is being discharged. How is Dan angry? He should be. He has conditions. Amelia looked at the purple star frozen on the screen. So do I. Rachel waited. Amelia spoke more quietly. No publicity, no use of his daughter, no private settlement that hides the record, no reform designed by people who never worked the floor. That may cost more. Amelia looked at the emergency report. It already cost 12 patients the equipment they were promised. She ended the call. At Blackridge, Dan helped Lucy into her coat. A nurse brought a wheelchair. Lucy refused it. "I can walk." Dan smiled. "I know." They moved slowly through the corridor, near the cafeteria entrance. The same worker from the night before stood beside a newly placed table. 2 bowls of soup waited beneath a handwritten sign. Emergency meal available. No payment required. The worker saw Dan. Her eyes filled. "I am sorry." Dan looked at the table. "Who approved this headquarters?" He picked up the sign. The words had been written quickly. No policy language, no eligibility requirement, no explanation. Lucy looked at the soup. "Can anyone have it?" The worker nodded. "Anyone who needs it." Lucy looked up at Dan. "Then it is better." Dan set the sign back on the table. Outside, snow moved through the parking lights. A black sedan waited near the curb. Amelia stood beside it without the green coat. No security detail, no press, only a covered box of food in her hands. Dan stopped beneath the entrance lights. Lucy tightened her grip around his fingers. Amelia walked toward them. For the first time, neither title nor disguise stood between the 3 of them. Snow gathered along the curb outside Blackridge Veterans Medical Center. The ambulance entrance glowed behind Amelia, washing the pavement in white light. She held the covered box of food with both hands, not like an executive delivering a gesture, but like someone carrying something fragile. Dan stopped several feet away. Lucy stood beside him in her winter coat, pale from the hospital stay, but breathing without effort. Amelia looked at her first. "Are you feeling better?" Lucy nodded. "My lungs are quieter. That is good." Lucy studied her face. "You were Mara." Amelia lowered her eyes. "Yes, you said your name was Mara." "I did. That was not true. No." Dan watched Amelia absorb the accusation without trying to soften it. Lucy looked at the box. "What is in there? Chicken soup, bread, vegetables, and 2 slices of apple pie." Lucy turned to Dan. She remembered bread. Dan did not smile. "Why are you here?" he asked. Amelia met his eyes. "To tell you the truth without a conference table between us. You could have called. I could have. You could have told me who you were last night." "Yes." The answer came without defense. Snow touched Amelia's hair and melted against her dark coat. Dan looked toward the waiting sedan. No cameras, no public relations staff, no lawyer, not here. Lucy tugged gently at Dan's sleeve. "It is cold." Dan looked down at her, then back at Amelia. "Our apartment is small. I remember." He did not ask how. He opened the rear passenger door of the sedan long enough to remove Lucy's hospital bag, then led her toward the building. Amelia followed. The damaged apartment lock had been replaced by independent security. Fresh metal shone against the old wood. Inside, the heater rattled unevenly. A strip of plastic covered the bedroom window. Lucy's drawings remained spread across the kitchen table beside the empty inhaler box. Amelia placed the food down. The room smelled of laundry soap dust and cold air. Lucy climbed into her chair. Dan remained standing. Amelia removed a folder from beneath the box. "I brought documents." Dan looked at it. "I told Rachel I did not want a settlement." "It is not a settlement. What is it? Your reinstatement, back pay, correction of the security report, confirmation of continuing medical coverage, and a formal acknowledgement that North Star retaliated against you after you reported possible supply diversion." Dan did not reach for the folder, and the silence clause. "There is none. The release of liability, none. The part where I agree not to speak to investigators, it does not exist." Dan stared at her for several seconds. "Why, because protecting North Star from the truth is how this began." Lucy opened the food box and lifted the lid. Steam rose into the room. She looked at Dan. "Can I serve it?" He nodded. She placed 3 bowls on the table. Amelia watched her divide the soup carefully, giving Dan the largest portion. He moved 1 spoonful from his bowl into hers. She moved it back. Amelia looked away, but not before Dan noticed. "You saw the full footage," he said. "Yes, you saw Victor use my daughter's medical records. Yes. You saw him threaten my job. Yes. And you stayed quiet." Amelia sat at the table. "I did." Lucy paused with the bread in her hand. Dan's voice remained calm. Why I believed I needed to see how far he would go, and how far was enough. Amelia looked at the cracked linoleum beneath her chair. When he refused you food, no. When he mentioned Lucy, no. When he hit the tray, Amelia's eyes lifted. That was already too far. But you still did not tell him who you were. No. Dan sat across from her. You were gathering evidence. Yes, you decided evidence mattered more than stopping him. Yes. The word seemed to cost her something. Dan leaned back. I have seen officers make that decision. They call it necessary while someone else bleeds. Amelia accepted the comparison. In Afghanistan, I once delayed evacuation for a soldier because I believed another casualty had a better chance of survival. The first soldier died before the helicopter returned. Lucy looked at her. Was it your fault Amelia took time before answering? It was my decision. That is not the same thing, Lucy said. No. But you still remember him, every day. Dan looked at Amelia differently now, not with forgiveness, with recognition. A person could carry responsibility without pretending it was innocence. Amelia opened the folder. There is another document. Dan glanced at the first page. North Star Emergency Access and Medical Surplus Task Group. He closed the folder. No, Amelia did not move. You have not read it. I do not need to. It is a paid 6-month assignment. I load medical crates. You identified a diversion system that passed 3 internal reviews. I noticed boxes in the wrong place. You understood what those boxes meant. Dan looked toward Lucy. That does not make me qualified to run a company program. I am not offering you a ceremonial position. What are you offering? Training in compliance, food safety, logistics planning, and public program administration. You would work with clinic staff, warehouse employees, veteran groups, community food networks, and independent auditors. Dan turned the folder back toward her. Why me? Because every executive who reviewed those reports saw inventory. You saw patients. Lucy placed a piece of bread on Amelia's napkin. We share things here. Amelia looked down at it. The bread was small and unevenly cut. She accepted it with both hands. Dan watched her. If I agree, I set conditions. I expected that. No advertising using my name. Agreed. No photographs of Lucy. Agreed. No story about how North Star saved us. Agreed. No meal program that makes people prove they are poor. Amelia nodded. No eligibility interview for an emergency meal. No table hidden near a service door. It stays in the main public area. Employees need a reporting line outside regional management. Independent and audited. Medical supplies cannot be donated just because someone says they are still good. There has to be inspection, documented custody, and legal approval. Yes, frontline workers sit on the task group. They will. Executive bonuses cannot reward cost reduction while ignoring access and safety. Amelia paused. That requires board approval. Then get it. The room became quiet. Amelia held his gaze. I will. Dan looked through the pages. The salary was stable. The hours would allow him to take Lucy to medical appointments. Health coverage remained active. None of it felt safe. Safety offered by a company could be withdrawn by another signature. He had learned that. This is not permanent, he said. No. What happens after 6 months if the program works? The board creates a permanent position through standard review. And if it does not, North Star publishes the results and explains why. No polished numbers, no hidden failures. Dan closed the folder. I want independent access to the raw data. Amelia nodded. You will have it. Lucy looked between them. Does Dad have the job? Dan picked up his spoon. He has soup. That was not my question. Amelia smiled for the first time. No, it was not. Dan ate 1 spoonful before answering. He is thinking. 3 weeks later, Dan entered North Star headquarters through the front doors. He wore a clean shirt beneath his old field jacket. His temporary badge carried no executive title. Program advisor. Rachel met him in the lobby. You are early. I have spent half my life in military transport. Early is the only time I trust. She handed him a tablet. First audit review begins in 10 minutes. Who is attending? Compliance, food services, logistics, nursing, legal 2 warehouse employees, 3 community partners, and Amelia. Any regional vice presidents too. Do they want to be here? Number good. The meeting did not go smoothly. One manager argued that open meal access would attract people who did not belong in medical facilities. Dan looked at him. Hungry is not a type of person. The manager shifted. I mean people without legitimate business. Eating is legitimate business. Another executive warned that unrestricted meals could create crowd control problems. A cafeteria worker from Black Ridge raised her hand. We already know how to manage crowds. What we did not know was whether we were allowed to use judgment. Dan looked at her. You were allowed. Victor said we were not. Then the policy failed before you did. The woman lowered her eyes. No. I still laughed. No one rushed to rescue her from the admission. Amelia sat at the far end of the table listening. The worker continued. I laughed because everyone else did. Then I watched him give away the meal he bought for his child. She looked at Dan. I am sorry. Dan nodded once. The apology did not erase the night. It still mattered. Over the next 6 months, the task group reviewed every North Star facility. They found more than stolen inventory. They found food assistance signs placed where no patient could see them. They found staff who wanted to help but feared discipline. They found managers who had used eligibility rules to remove veterans with incomplete records. They found sealed nutrition packs destroyed because the approved donation truck arrived late. They found clinics that had quietly ignored bad policy for years and fed people anyway. Dan spent most of his time in loading docks, cafeterias, storage rooms, and waiting areas. He asked drivers when manifests changed. He asked nurses what supplies disappeared first during storms. He asked cleaners where hungry families slept when the lobby closed. He asked people receiving meals whether the process made them feel watched. The answers changed the program more than any executive presentation. At a facility in Pueblo, Dan found the emergency meal table beside the trash room. He carried it himself toward the front windows. A manager followed him. That placement was intentional. So is this one. You cannot simply rearrange public space. Dan set the table beneath the warmest lights in the cafeteria. Watch me. At a clinic near the Wyoming border, a receptionist demanded identification from a woman asking for food. Dan stepped beside her. The policy says no documentation required. The receptionist frowned. How do we prevent abuse? Dan looked at the woman's shaking hands. Feed her first. Debate the risk after. North Star did not repair itself quickly. 3 senior managers resigned during the independent audit. 2 were referred to investigators. The medical reseller connected to the stolen respiratory kits was shut down while authorities examined its contracts. Victor Shaw faced criminal and civil investigations. The company published its disposal errors, missed complaints, and failed safeguards. Its stock price fell. Several board members complained that transparency had created unnecessary damage. Amelia answered in the next meeting. The damage existed before publication. She suspended executive bonuses for the quarter. The decision passed by 1 vote. Dan was not in that room. He was at Black Ridge, helping a kitchen supervisor redesign the meal distribution system so no recipient had to stand in a separate line. At home, the changes were quieter. North Star repaired the broken apartment lock and paid for the damage caused by its security team. Dan refused an offer to move into company housing. Instead, he used his restored wages and new salary to rent a modest apartment near Lucy's school. The windows sealed properly. The heater worked without rattling. There was food in the refrigerator, not abundance, enough. Elaine Porter visited on a gray afternoon in March. She inspected Lucy's medication storage bedroom, school attendance records, and Dan's new work schedule. Lucy followed her through every room. At the kitchen table, Elaine opened her file. Your employment is stable. Housing concerns have been resolved. Medical coverage is active. Dan sat across from her. And the review. Elaine closed the folder. It is being closed. Lucy stood beside Dan. You are not taking me, no, because we have more food. Elaine considered the question. Because the evidence shows you are safe. Lucy frowned. I was safe before. Elaine looked at Dan. He said nothing. She lowered her eyes. Yes, she said, you were. After she left, Lucy placed a drawing on the table. Dan stood beside a long table filled with soup bowls. Amelia stood near the window. Rachel held a clipboard. Above them, purple stars covered the sky. Across the top, Lucy had written, My dad feeds people. Dan framed the drawing with inexpensive black wood. He placed it near the front door. 6 months after the night in the cafeteria, North Star launched the Open Table and Ready Shelf program. The first open table stood near the front window at Black Ridge. A simple sign rested at its center. Emergency meal available. No purchase required. No explanation required. Behind the cafeteria, the ready shelf tracked medical items approaching internal redistribution dates. Every transfer required inspection, documented custody, and confirmation from an approved receiving clinic. Warehouse employees could report irregularities through an outside system. Regional managers could not delete the reports. The first morning, Dan arrived before sunrise. He checked the food storage temperatures. He reviewed the respiratory inventory. He spoke with the overnight nurses and the cleaning staff. Then he sat near the front window with coffee. Amelia entered without warning. She wore a dark coat and carried no assistance folder. Dan looked at the clock. "You are early. I learned from military transport you were a surgeon. Surgeons wait for transport too." They stood near the open table. A tired woman entered, holding the hand of a young boy. Rain darkened her sleeves. She stopped near the cafeteria entrance and counted coins in her palm. A newly trained employee approached. "Would you both like something warm?" The woman looked embarrassed. "I do not have enough." The employee gestured toward the table. "You do not need to explain." The woman hesitated. Then she sat. The boy climbed into the chair beside her. 2 bowls of soup arrived. No manager appeared. No security officer asked for identification. No one lifted a phone. Dan watched from across the room. Amelia looked at him. "You are not going over there. They do not need me." She understood. The system had done what it was built to do. Beside the open table hung a framed napkin marked with one blurred purple star. Below it, a small plaque read, "A meal can keep someone alive. Dignity can help them live." Amelia looked at the napkin. "Do you regret giving away that dinner?" Dan watched the woman divide a piece of bread for her son. "I regret that she needed it. And now fewer people have to ask." The cafeteria filled slowly. Ambulance crews entered between calls. Nurses carried coffee into the halls. Medical crates moved through the receiving bay beneath new audit cameras. Lucy sat at one end of the open table doing homework while she waited for Dan's shift to end. She finished a math problem, took a clean napkin from the dispenser, and drew a purple star in the corner. Then she slid it toward the empty chair across from her. Outside, snow began to fall against the windows. Inside the chair did not remain empty for long.